One of the famous lines in the movie called The Love Story defines love meaning as never saying I'm sorry. I guess then, even if one does wrong to God, he doesn't have to ask for forgiveness. Certainly, only the devil doesn't want you to repent. Anyway, I do like to smack him on the back of his head though. In Matthew 5:44, Christ said to love your enemies, not others' enemies, but your enemies, not all enemies, not even the adversary Satan. Obviously, if you love others' enemy, others will not like you much. If you love all enemies, likewise the rest won't like you much. If you love Satan, obviously God won't like you much. Christ said to love your enemies. Yet if you were to say love all, obviously you would be teaching false. In Mark 12:31, Christ taught us to love your neighbor. Yet if you love others' neighbor, that would be quite fruitless, especially if he doesn't even love his own neighbor. Yet preach to love others' neighbor, that would be quite false and hypocritical. Especially these days, they don't even know their neighbors, even right next door, nor do they even care for one another. In John 13:34 to 35, uh, speaking of one another, Christ gave a new commandment. A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another, and as I have loved you, that ye also love one another. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. Now, there are quite a few important points here. Number one, it's a new commandment, obviously. Number two, love one another. Number three, if so, if we love one another, others will know we are disciples of Christ. Now, in order to know and do this, you must know, number one, is a new commandment. Number two, you gotta know who, quote unquote, one another is. And number three, you gotta be obviously the follower of Christ. Now, among these, the most important part, I think, is to know just who one another is. When Christ said one another, he obviously doesn't mean all. Christ said to love one another. He didn't say to love all. So obviously, if one preaches to love all, then he would be false and erroneous. Likewise, when Christ said one another, he obviously was talking about the brethren. He was not talking about anyone nor everyone. And if one doesn't know his brethren, he would be either lacking discernment or have no discernment at all. If he lacks discernment, he would be a babe. And if he has no discernment still, he would be not of the Spirit. So the obvious question would be, who are my brethren, right? Christ lays out quite clearly in Matthew 12:46 to 50. While he yet talked to the people, behold, his mother and his brethren stood without, desiring to speak with him. Then one said unto him, Behold, thy mother and thy brethren stand without, desiring to speak with thee. But he answered and said unto him that told him, Who is my mother, and who are my brethren? And he stretched forth his hand towards his disciples, and said, Behold, my mother and my brethren. For whosoever shall do the will of my Father which is in heaven, the same is my brother and sister and mother. Matthew 12:46 to 50. So the bottom line is, who would be my brethren would be, is that uh, anyone who does the will of God, definitely not someone who does his self-righteous will, not even physical mother or brother or sister. Uh, Even if he is for peace, when he espouses the earthly peace over heavenly peace, certainly he is not doing the will of God. So the next question would be, what is the will of God? Is gossiping the will of God? Certainly not. Is accusing the will of God? Of course not. That would be the will of Satan. So just what is the will of God? John 6:40. And this is the will of him that sent me, that everyone which seeth the Son and believe on him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. We know what must one do to be saved, which is to believe on Christ. So the last obvious question would be, what must one do to believe?